and welcome to today's episode of The Pagan Parlor. Today is Friday, November 19th, 2021, and I am your host, Maximilian Pensword, but you can call me Max. Here in this podcast, we explore a variety of things related to paganism. At this point, I would like to give a notice and reminder that paganism is a broad term that envelops many different pantheons and belief systems, and as such, this podcast will be focused on paganism as a whole and not on any specific branch of it. Each episode contains a short lesson on a stone or metal, a story, myth, or legend, and the segment I like to call Keeping Up with the Christians, which you will hopefully find amusing as well as informative on what the Christians are up to lately. Now, since we are all busy people, we'll jump straight in with a quick ritual. This ritual is intended to join the energies of the listeners in with the energies of the host, as well as the same in reverse, as well as some basic protections against the ill intentions of others. I will now light the candle, and as I do so, I invite all beings of good energy and good intent into the ritual space. Humans and gods and goddesses alike, spirits and the fae, come and join together in good nature and to play. Come old, come young, come scarred and burned, it matters not, there's a lesson to be learned. Come in good faith, and you will be safe, but come with ill intent, and your mind shall get bent. Bring us together in storms and good weather, keep us from pain, and from those who are sane. For the harm of none, and the good of many, we call to the gods, and they are many. Blessed are we, so mote it be. This week, one of our listeners by the name of Kip has requested some information on the stone by the name of Labradorite. As such, today our lesson will be on Labradorite. This week's lesson uses information that comes from thecrystalcouncil.com, gemsociety.org, and wikipedia.org. Labradorite is a calcium-rich feldspar-type stone, which was first discovered in Labrador, Canada. The stone can display an iridescent effect. The stone can be gray, gray-white, brown, greenish, a pale green, blue, yellow, or without color, and typically forms thin and tabular crystals. The stone rates 6 to 6.5 on the hardness scale and can be found in Canada, Poland, Norway, Finland, and various other locations around the world. Labradorite is used to harness the potential of one's own transformative power and is often recommended for those experiencing anxiety or self-doubt. Labradorite reminds us that we are the judge, jury, and executioner of our own reality and happiness, and have the power to change our own paths. Labradorite is also used to help spellcasters awaken their potential and grant protection, both spiritually and physically. Of course, this does not mean that it will make you immune to bullets, so don't be a dumbass and get yourself shot or jump off a building because the podcast guy said Labradorite will protect you. Chances are you will still die from something lethal unless you are a seriously experienced practitioner who is actively focusing on their protection spell and way more powerful than most people can attain within their lifetime. Next, we have our Pagan Promotions section. Herein, I will highlight one person of interest, celebrity, or pagan-owned business per week. This week, we are taking a look at a pagan business which has a brick-and-mortar residence in Riverside, California, but was actually formed at a Renaissance fair. Marsh Apothecary is located at 3643 University Avenue, Riverside, California, 92501, but can normally be found at a stall at a Renaissance fair nearby. They have been in business for over 30 years and got their start from a simple stall at a Renaissance fair and eventually created a physical storefront after their business grew beyond what a stall at a fair could contain. Marsh also has an online store which can be located at dragonmarsh.com, all one word, and is currently running a special where shoppers can use the coupon code HOPE or PEPPER in order to get free shipping on orders totaling over $25. This will, of course, be useful to any looking to stock up on their occult supplies, as this store sells teas, crystals, herbs, candles, incense, oils, jewelry, and more. With some crystals being as low as $1, it would be easy enough to find 25 crystals you want in order to meet this limit. So head on over to dragonmarsh.com and stock up on your spellcraft supplies. next section is on stories, myths, and legends. In this portion of the podcast, I will retell a legend, myth, or story related to the gods, magic, or anything else that I feel to be paganism related. Information for today's story comes from smithsonianmag.com. Since this coming Thursday, the 25th of November, is the day commonly celebrated in the United States as a day of Thanksgiving to celebrate when the Europeans discovered the American continent and celebrated their first harvest with the natives who welcomed them happily, I thought it fitting to tell a story. A story similar to the Thanksgiving Day story in origin, but not much else. This is the real story of Thanksgiving. In the year 1620, Christian European colonizers landed at Plymouth, in a place that is now known as Massachusetts. At the time of their arrival, the chief of the Wampanoag tribe offered them an informal alliance in order to help protect his tribe from the rival tribes. Over the next 50 years, the colonizers expanded from the land that they were allotted. They spread disease among the Wampanoag people and exploited them for resources and hunted the livestock on their lands. This eventually culminated with a vicious and bloody conflict, which came to be known as King Philip's War, which devastated the Wampanoag people and shifted the balance of power into the hands of the Christian colonizers from Europe. Fast forward to today. The remnants of the Wampanoag tribe are still alive. Each year, on the day celebrated by the descendants of the colonizers as Thanksgiving, they are forced to swallow their pride as the traditions spit upon the memories of their ancestors in order to misrepresent history in favor of the conquering invaders. The historical trauma from them is very real and hangs around their necks inescapable in public schools, in churches, in malls, in any place where the general populace gathers. They do not forget what was done to them, and they must live with the invaders' descendants' mockery at this time each year. That was a true story of Thanksgiving. I can't say that I hope you enjoyed it, but I certainly hope you learned something new about where the celebration comes from and what it means to those who know. Now I am going to tell you another story. Another very real story about an organization called the Salvation Army that every year puts bell ringers dressed in red all over the place to ask for donations. But are they really an army of salvation or a force of cruel oppression? According to an article on HuffPost, the Salvation Army has a long history of promoting anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and refusing them help. For many years, they posted on their websites and publicly stated that homosexuality was abnormal and against their God's will for society. In 1986, the Salvation Army of New Zealand collected signatures against the passing of the law that decriminalized sex between adult men. Later on, they apologized. In 1998, the United States Salvation Army chose to turn down $3.5 million in contracts from San Francisco, which resulted in the closure of many programs for the homeless and for senior citizens due to the fact that they did not want to provide equal benefits for same-sex married couples as they did to straight married couples, as mandated by San Francisco. Then, in 2004, they closed down all of their services for the homeless in New York City because of a similar ordinance of non-discrimination. In 2000, the Salvation Army of Scotland submitted a letter to Parliament because they did not want schools teaching that it was acceptable to be in a same-sex relationship. In 2012, the Salvation Army of Burlington, Vermont fired a caseworker immediately after they found out she was bisexual, quoting their employment handbook, which stated they reserve the right to make employment decisions on the basis of conduct and behavior that is incompatible with their principles. Later that year, their spokesperson, Major George Hood, reaffirmed their anti-gay stance and called the same-sex relationship a personal choice that goes against the will of their God. In 2013, the Salvation Army was working hard to remove the links from the websites for conversion therapy. and recently they have begun changing their public stance on this and stating that they are serving members of the LGBTQ community in their soup kitchens and homeless shelters and abiding by anti-discrimination laws. But they have a history of abiding by these laws by shutting down services where they apply. Many people have heard stories of how someone who has been refused help by this salvationless army. Many people know someone who has been refused help by this salvationless army. Stories of people being denied food while starving, or being left to freeze to death because they weren't allowed into a shelter due to their gender identity, their same-sex marriage or partnership, or even because a couple was simply not legally married. This is the story of the Salvation Army. This is the story of those red Santa suit-wearing people ringing the bells and asking for donations. This is the story of how a group of Christians claiming to care, once again, only managed to care about a certain people, and not all people. Give your donations to someone else. Maybe prepare some small pro-gay literature that folds up to the size of $1 to drop in. Just an idea. Well, that's it for story time for today. Now let's move on to the next section, which I like to call Keeping Up with the Christians. In this segment, I take a look at what the Christians are doing lately and dissect it from a non-Christian's point of view. Part of this is a report on their goings-on, and part of it's just making fun of them, so I hope you enjoy. This week, the Catholics have continued to show their removal from the problems of those in need. According to an article on VaticanNews.va, Pope Francis went to an Italian town by the name of Assisi in order to pray with the poor. First, he cloistered himself in a local convent to pray with the clergy, and then he gathered roughly 500 of the financially troubled to have a conversation where he spoke of how the homeless, the unemployed, and the immigrants are important to the Church, as is service to the poor. He then prayed with them and gave them each a backpack full of clothes and a single meal before patting himself on the back and going home. Now, let's take a look at some cold hard data to help put this in perspective. According to the information available on, it's a long one, www.churchpop-com.cdn.ampproject.org, a parish priest makes only $25 to $35K a year, equivalent in USD. Cardinals make about $68K a year equivalent in USD, and a retired pope gets all of their living expenses covered and half of what a cardinal makes. Meanwhile, according to the information from Wikipedia.org, the total population of Assisi is only 28,000 people, meaning that having gathered 500 financially troubled individuals, amounting to roughly 1.8% of the total population, they may not seem like a lot, but that means that of every 100 people you saw, on average about 2 of them would be homeless or unemployed or struggling financially due to their circumstances. With all of the money that the Catholic Church makes, and how much the cardinals bring home in a year, one would think that one could do more than a single meal and some clothes. According to an article on HustlerDigest.com, the Catholic Church has approximately $10 billion or more, with some being stock holdings in chemicals, banking, insurance, real estate, and more. With these kind of resources and holdings, one would think that these people who are supposed to be important to them would be worth more than a meal and a change of clothes. So let me get this straight. With over $10 billion in assets, the best they can do for the poor is to feed them once. I suppose this is perfectly in line with our God, who descended at one point in time, who decided to feed a crowd with someone else's food. All those fish and loaves fed everybody. Yay! One time. At least in pagan communities, we set up food drives and make donations to help people survive for longer than one meal will let them. Also, we don't make people stand out in the cold for hours while we talk about how important they are to us because of the saints and their work for the poor. If we're going to help somebody, we just do it. We don't spend more on resources telling people about it than actually doing it. This is clearly just a publicity ploy in order to raise public opinion. In other news, according to ChristianHeadlines.com, a pro-life group just spent $2.5 million on an ad campaign in order to alter public opinion in advance of a Supreme Court case where they are arguing that the science in Roe v. Wade 1973 is outdated. The Supreme Court will be hearing oral arguments on December 1st in a case regarding a Mississippi law that bans abortion after 15 weeks. So Texas isn't enough. Now they want to erase the Roe v. Wade decision that gives every woman the right to decide what happens with her body. Just because it has a heartbeat does not mean it is better off alive. If they truly believe in their God, then they should accept that their babies are in a shiny heaven now and better off. Anyone who honestly believed in their religion would rejoice as death as anyone without sin would be given to eternal paradise. This is just another way for them to control people. Stop it already. Also, according to an article on theledger.com, there was a cartoon that indicated the Democrats were the party of choice for Christ and not the Republicans, and lots of Christians are butthurt about it. Surprise, surprise. Beyond that, an article posted on mirror.co.uk, there was a suicide bomber in Liverpool, and he was able to immigrate into the country because after being denied his entry visa the first time, he converted to Christianity and lived for a few years convincing all the members of his Christian church that he was a good Christian man and a genuine convert. He himself died in the bombing, but the driver of the cab he was in survived and has been discharged from the hospital. Basically, what happened is, when they decided that the guy was fishy, he changed religions and changed his name and tried again. They let him in because Christians are supposed to be good people, and then he went and blew himself up a few years later for no apparent reason. My thoughts are that, as with many, he just wanted asylum and was running away from conflict. But once he started smoking the communion wafers with Father Jim for a few years, got all high on Jesus, he decided to go and blow something up, but missed his target. When will people learn that Jesus can be as bad as heroin? Oh gods, let's just hope they don't figure out how to freebase the body of Christ. Finally, the Archdiocese of Roman Catholic Church in Cologne, Germany, according to an article on usnews.com, on Thursday, the 18th, the Archdiocese held a service to apologize for all the cases of sexual abuse by the clergy. The accompanying Archbishop of Cologne has been removed for a period of several months for what they call major errors of communication. An additional archbishop by the name of Stefan Hesse offered his resignation to Pope Francis, who rejected it after taking a few weeks to think about it. Many of those abused by the local priest are less than impressed by the show of penance and public acknowledgement, as it took place in the very church that represented so much pain to so many people. Basically, somebody in the Catholic Church is finally owning up, but the Pope won't let them take any actual responsibility for what happened, and is just giving out vacations instead. They must be getting desperate if they're accepting that they did something wrong, however. Wonder if this has anything to do with that publicity stunt where he was praying with the poor and giving them a single meal and some clothes. Well, that's it for Keeping Up with the Christians for today. Tune in next week to find out the latest Christian drama. Now it is time for audience Q&A. This week, I had 3 or 4 people send in emails, and so I will not be able to get to them all. As such, one will be rolled over into next week's episode. Lyric, your question is an excellent one and will be addressed next time. The first of the 2 questions I will be discussing this week comes from a listener who goes by the name of Estrella, and who is a personal friend of mine in real life. She writes, "What are some wards that I could use on the entryways to my house for protection? I understand one doesn't want to salt outside as it damages the soil for years, but I want to ensure protection for myself and my loved ones. Can you provide some information on warding?" Mary meet, Estrella. I would first like to address a common misconception about salt. Common table salt, such as we often use in rituals and wards, does not cause lasting damage to the soil. Heavier salts, such as borax, can kill vegetation for a longer period of time, but table salt, whether in the form of sea salt, pink Himalayan, or Morton's granulated table salt, will wash away with some rain or a garden hose, and as such it loses its ability to kill vegetation or damage the soil rather quickly. Now on to warding. A common ward used in my grandparents' time was to hang a bit of iron over the door, often in the form of an old horseshoe or whatever else was laying around. Other methods would be using the oils of herbs that have protective properties, such as the nettle, using a verbal spell along with touching the doorframe with intent, getting foo dogs, and or placing brick dust under your doormat. I hope this information helps you out. Be safe, and blessed be. Our next question comes from Stephanie in the Sorcerers Guild on Facebook. She writes, "A question for your podcast that might be helpful for new pagans. In your opinion, what is the difference between being a pagan and being of a different belief?" Mary meets Stephanie. I would first like to say that this is a wonderful question. At the start of each episode, I talk about how paganism is a broad term that envelops many different beliefs and pantheons, and this question gives me a bit of an opportunity to talk more about that. What I mean when I say that paganism is a broad term that envelops many different beliefs and pantheons is that paganism, or being pagan, does not mean that you have any specific belief set, merely that you have a belief set and that it is not one of the world's major religions. This basically means anyone who isn't a Christian, Jew, Islamic, atheist, or Hindu could be considered a pagan. This means that if you are a Wiccan, a Druid, a Shaman, a Spiritualist, a person who follows a Native American tradition of one tribe or of many, one who follows the Norse gods or the Greek gods or the Roman gods or any mix of gods and or goddesses you like in your own mishmash belief system, or even no gods but a belief in spirits, magic, and or reincarnation, you can be considered a pagan. As for myself, personally, I pray to Hecate, Gaia, Artemis, Cernunnos, and Kronos, but Hecate is my primary goddess and my light in the dark. I hope this answers your question adequately. Blessed be. To anyone who wants to chime in, if you would like to ask questions, leave a comment or suggestion, or content suggestions, or even just send me death threats because you're a butthurt Christian and cannot stand to hear me talking smack about your religion, please feel free to send them to me at paganparlor1313@gmail.com. That's all I have for today. Thank you for tuning in to The Pagan Parlor. Again, any questions, comments, suggestions, or death threats can be sent to paganparlor1313@gmail.com. The whole of the law shall be do as thou wilt, but harm none. Blessed be. And don't forget to blow out your candles.